We like to imagine victims as saints, but history tells us that some halos conceal horns. In the Nazi concentration camps, not every prisoner was equal. Some were elevated to positions of authority known as the kapos. Their job? Enforce the rules, maintain order, even mete out punishments to other prisoners. The historian Lawrence Rees, in his work Auschwitz, the Nazis and the Final Solution, documents how many kapos could be ruthless, sometimes brutal. Primo Levi, who survived Auschwitz, described this in his essay, The Gray Zone. Survival often demanded moral compromises, and some victims became collaborators. The shock is this. In the most dehumanizing conditions, the oppressed sometimes turned against one another, not because they were evil, but because the system was designed to corrupt solidarity and amplify cruelty. That is the paradox that we must face. Suffering does not guarantee sainthood. It reveals both halos and horns. In his works, Stalin's Genocides and Fires of Hatred, Norman Naimark shows how cycles of victimhood and violence can flip. Groups once oppressed sometimes become perpetrators themselves. In Stalin's USSR, exiles who survived brutal conditions and were later rehabilitated often became zealous enforcers, eager to prove loyalty even by turning against others. Primo Levi captured this moral blur with the concept of the gray zone. In totalitarian systems, moral categories collapse. Victims sometimes become collaborators while others resisted, but both extremes, they lived side by side. We cling to a cultural myth that suffering purifies, that pain produces halos, but history, it suggests the opposite. Hardship simply magnifies whatever is already within. Some, they emerge more compassionate, but others, they emerge more cruel. And this is the problem. If we assume that victimhood equals virtue, we blind ourselves to the truth. Victimhood doesn't guarantee purity. It exposes human nature at its extremes. Prisoners were divided by function. Some, given authority as kapos, inflicted violence on their fellow prisoners. Others risked their lives to share food or to comfort the weak. Same condition, different outcomes. As Levi put it, both extremes of humanity in the same place. So in Stalin's USSR, for instance, Naimark describes how victims of repression, once rehabilitated, sometimes became agents, again, as we mentioned, of the very state that had crushed them. To prove loyalty, they would, as we said, go ahead and inflict that suffering on others. The cycle of oppression reproduced itself. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, Ben Kiernan in the Pol Pot regime records how children traumatized by violence were given weapons and turned into executioners themselves. Victims remade as perpetrators. Take the example of Rwanda in 1994. In When Victims Become Killers, Mahmoud Mamdani details how long oppressed groups, once empowered, then went on to commit atrocities of their own. The thread across these cases, it's clear. Victimhood doesn't erase the capacity for cruelty. It simply intensifies human nature for better or for worse. Sigmund Bauman in Modernity and the Holocaust showed how bureaucracies exploit ambiguity, turning ordinary people, even victims, into functionaries of oppression. Hannah Pitkin, in The Concept of Representation, argued that power is relational. Even the powerless can replicate domination when given the scraps of authority. And Levi, in his Gray Zone essay, insisted on the complexity. Camps produced astonishing acts of generosity alongside horrifying betrayals, often among the very same categories of victims. Why then do we cling to halos? Because halos, they make the story simple. Victims as saints, perpetrators as devils, clean lines, easy morals. But history, unfortunately, it resists simplicity. The truth is harder. Victims are not automatically virtuous. They are human, capable of both mercy and betrayal, both empathy and cruelty. And this dynamic didn't die in the 20th century. Victimhood today is moral currency. Groups claim oppression to claim authority. Sometimes it's justified, but once power shifts, history warns halos don't prevent horns. The bullied intern who becomes the tyrannical boss, patterns repeat. Hurt people can hurt others. Outrage often begins with real grievance in terms of social media mobs, but it quickly devolves into harassment, scapegoating, exclusion. Victims, they morph into tormentors. The lesson is that victimhood is not destiny, it's a crucible. Some, they emerge tempered into empathy. Others emerge brittle, sharpened into cruelty. So what can you learn from these terribly dark, but also occasionally inspirational experiences? What can we take away from this? Well, the first is break the halo reflex. Don't assume that victims are morally pure. Judge people by their deeds, not by their wounds. Next, audit your own pain. Ask, has hardship made me more empathetic or more entitled? Write down one example and confront it. Then, refuse gray zone excuses. Don't excuse cruelty because of suffering. Pain can explain behavior, but it never justifies it. Finally, control your narrative. The story you tell about your suffering is going to shape you. Does it license vengeance or does it sharpen your empathy? These are not abstract ideas, they are practices. Victimhood is inevitable in life. What matters is whether you let it deform you or discipline you. The rule to remember here is that suffering doesn't sanctify, it magnifies. Again, as we've learned, suffering, it doesn't guarantee sainthood. It magnifies human nature. Some halos, they're going to shine a lot brighter, but some horns are going to grow a lot sharper in that darkness as well. Other people will cling to the myth of pure victimhood, but you're going to see clearly. You're going to pierce the halo, you're going to spot the horns beneath, and you're going to refuse to confuse suffering with sanctity. That's not cynicism, that's clarity. And clarity is power.